everyone! So in this video we're going to be talking about the human skeleton. We're going to get into some of the functions of the skeleton, the two categories of your skeleton, the vertebral column, different types of joints. We're going to go into some things about inside of your actual bone, and we're going to even talk about some bone fractures. Also, this channel is part of a non-profit organization called One World, One Nation, where we strive to support underprivileged children or kids who are just looking for an extended learning platform and give them that scientific extended learning and enrichment class. So please subscribe to this channel to support our initiative, and if you'd like more information about our nonprofit, then please look at the description box below where we have the link to our website. Thank you. The functions of the skeleton. Many people think that the skeleton is just a stiff structure inside of you. And while one of the purposes of the skeleton is to give you structure, there are many more important and interesting things you may not know about the very bones that are inside of you. For instance, the skeleton also serves to protect many of our vital organs, such as your heart is protected by your rib cage and your skull is protected by your brain. Also, your bones are very important for storing material that your body uses. Again, you might think of your bones as lifeless and even hollow, but the opposite is actually true. Your bones have so many networks and even store materials such as fat, calcium, and they make red blood cells. Has someone ever told you if you drink your milk, then your bones will be stronger? Well, that is very true. When you drink milk, it gives your bones calcium, which makes your bones stronger. Also, the bones work closely with the muscles to actually allow you to move. So the adult skeleton is actually made up of 206 bones. When you're a baby, your skeleton actually has more bones because the bones are not really developed yet. And as you grow, these bones that are not really developed start to fuse together, and so you have less bones, but that doesn't mean that you lost bones. Some bones are just fused together. So this is what your basic skeleton looks like. Obviously, the whole skeleton is not labeled, but these are the major and larger bones of the skeleton. Your skull is called the cranium, your spine is called the vertebrae, and it protects the spinal cord. And there are your ribs, the sternum, the scapula, which make up your shoulder and shoulder blade, and connects with the humerus, which is the upper part of your arm. And then is the forearm, which is made up of two bones, the radius and the ulna, and your fingers and toes are actually called phalanges. So your leg, like the arm, are majorly made up of three bones. One is your thigh, which is the femur, and then is the tibia and fibula. So your patella is your kneecap, so you can kind of feel that on your knee. And then finally, connecting to the end of the vertebral column is the pelvis. Now the skeletal system is broken down into two major parts, the appendicular system and the axial skeleton. The appendicular skeleton are like the limbs, such as your arms and legs, and the axial skeleton are all the things beside your arms and legs, and just think of it as everything in the middle of your body, like your skull, your ribs, your pelvis, and your vertebral column. So the vertebral column. Your vertebral column is actually a series of bones that are basically to protect the spinal cord. So the spinal cord runs inside of the vertebral column, and it attaches to the brain. Now, what exactly does the vertebral column do? Well, the vertebral column protects the spinal cord, and the spinal cord kind of acts as a messaging system which takes information from the brain and delivers it to specific parts of your body and vice versa. So now, based on the picture, you can kind of see that the spinal cord is broken down into 5 major parts, and each of these parts is responsible for messaging different parts of your body. For instance, if there's a bug on your arm, then the arm will send a message to the thoracic part of the vertebral column and spinal cord, and then this will travel to the brain, and then the brain will figure out what to do about this bug on your arm. It'll send a message back down through the spinal cord and to your arm, and then the arm will shake or somehow get the bug off of it. So this is kind of how the messaging system of the spinal cord works. So something really important with the skeletal system is the different types of joints in your body. Now in your body there are many different types of joints, and you may ask, what are joints? Well, joints are basically just two bones that make contact with each other. So like I said, there are many different joints in your body, like your knee or your shoulder or finger, and each joint allows you to move in a different way. For example, your shoulder joint can allow for a lot of motion, but your finger joint doesn't really quite move this much. So we're going to be talking about most of the different kinds of joints in your body and what they actually look like inside of your body, so we can actually see why some joints move so much while others can't move that much. The first joint we're going to be talking about is the ball and socket joints. So these are basically the joints that are found in your shoulder. So your shoulder joint is also called a ball and socket joint. And these allow you to move in basically any direction. So let's take a look at the actual structure of the bones to find out why it allows your arm to move in any direction. Well, based on the name, you can kind of tell that what the two bones kind of look like. So one of the bones has an end that looks like a ball, and the other bone is kind of like a socket or like a cup that holds the rounded bone. So with this structure, we can see that there will be a lot of movement in this area of the body because there's nothing really obstructing the ball-shaped bone from moving. Another kind of joint is the hinge joint. This kind of joint is found in your fingers and toes, and also your elbow and knee. Essentially, like a hinge on a door, this bone joint allows you to move in one kind of direction or movement. Again, the actual bones kind of look like a door hinge that allows the door to move only in one way, back and forth. Just like this, the knee can move back and forth, and so can the elbow or your fingers. You can see how this is different from the ball and socket, both in the form and the function. What I mean by form and function, form refers to how the bones actually look like, and function is kind of like how they're able to move. Okay, so next we're going to talk about the pivot joint. This joint allows for one bone to basically rotate around another bone. An example of this joint is in your neck, and it basically allows your neck to rotate all around. But this joint is not called a ball and socket joint because you cannot rotate your head all the way around like an owl, but you can just circle it around. So that's why it's not a ball and socket joint, because it doesn't have the same structure like a ball and socket joint, and also it doesn't have the same movement. The last joint type we're going to be talking about is the saddle joint, and it basically looks like a saddle and is found in your thumb. A joint is a joint in your thumb, and it basically allows for back and forth movement. So inside the bone, we've talked about how one of the skeleton's functions is to store things such as fat, red blood cells, which will make blood, and calcium. Now we're going to look more specifically into the structure of the bone and where the things are actually stored. So you might think of your bones again as solid, but actually parts of your bones are actually made up of many holes, and we call this kind of bone a spongy bone. Just like a sponge may have lots of holes, this kind of bone is made up of many holes. So the spongy bone is on the top of the bone and on the bottom of the bone. Now you may ask, why is your bone made up of all these holes? Won't it be easier to break and fracture if it has all these holes inside of it? What are all the benefits of having these holes inside of your bone? Well, like we said, the bone needs to store many things inside of them, and they need space to store these things. So the holes in parts of the bones create some space in the bone for material to actually be stored. So we know that the red blood cells and fat are stored in your bones, and the red blood cells can actually be stored inside of the spongy bone, or on the two sides of the bone, the top and the bottom bone. And the yellow bone marrow, which is basically stores fat, is stored in the middle of the bone, where there's like a large cavity or a hole inside the middle of the bone, and this is where the fats are stored. So we know that spongy bone is on the two ends of the bone, but what does the parts of the bone that are not spongy bone called? Well, these parts, which do not have any holes and are not spongy bone, are called compact bone, and they are on the outside of the bone and make up the middle of the bone. So this compact bone basically doesn't have any holes in it, and it's what we usually think of when we think of a bone. Okay, so next we're going to be talking about bone fractures. So this is something you guys can probably relate a lot to. Maybe you've broken your own bones, or you know someone that's broken their bone. But there's actually different ways that a bone fracture looks like, and that's what we're going to be talking about. But just in general, bones can break for many different reasons, such as sports injuries, or you fall from a great height, or something heavy is put on top of your bones. And these are all reasons why you might get a bone fracture. So let's get into some of the structures of a bone fracture. So first we have the transverse bone fracture. This is when there's like a horizontal split in the bone. And horizontal is just like side to side. There's a horizontal line going through the bone. And this doesn't just have to be in the middle of the bone, but it can be anywhere where there's a fracture in the bone that's a horizontal line. Okay, so the next one is the oblique bone fracture. This is, instead of having a horizontal line kind of going through the bone or appearing to go through the bone, there's a diagonal line, and this is when the bone is basically cut along a diagonal line, or it's damaged or broken along a diagonal line. The next is the spiral bone fracture. So the spiral bone fracture is when your bone is actually twisted, and that causes, the twisting of your bone causes a fracture or a breakage of the bone. This might sometimes look like the oblique bone fracture, but there are some, like, you can see the twisting of the bone, which happens during the spiral bone fracture. Okay, so the next one is the comminuted bone fracture. So this is a bone fracture that causes immense damage to your bone, as your bone is kind of shattered inside of your body, and there's many different pieces, so it takes time for your body to repair and regain all of this damage that was done to your bone. Okay, so the next bone fracture is the avulsion bone fracture. So this is basically when part of your bone is, like a chunk of your bone is kind of broken off or separated from the rest of your bone. And this is kind of different from the previous bone fracture because this is just one part of your bone it's not shattered, but one part of your bone just breaks away from the rest of your bone. The next bone fracture we have is the impacted bone fracture. This might happen if you jump from a really high height and you kind of like put a lot of tension or a lot of stress or pressure on your bones. And it's basically when your bones kind of they're forced into each other or caved into each other, and they cause a fracture this way, usually in the middle of the bone, as you can see from this picture. The next bone fracture is the fissure bone, or also called the linear bone fracture, where basically there's a vertical kind of crack in your bone that goes along the like up and down the bone. So this can be caused, again, by many different reasons, but it's not as severe as some of the other ones that we've talked about. So the last one is the green stick. This is when part of your bone is kind of damaged or disrupted. It doesn't go through the whole bone, but only part of your bone is kind of damaged or fractured. So that was it for this video. Hope you guys learned a lot about the different bone fractures, what your bone actually looks like on the inside, the functions of the bones, and everything about the vertebral column. Again, this channel is supported by a nonprofit organization called One World, One Nation. So please, if you are interested, then you can look at the website that's linked down below, and also subscribe to this channel and like this video. So here are a couple of citations I used for the pictures of this video. And here are a couple more citations I used for the pictures of this video. And here are the last bit of citations I used for the pictures of this video. So again, please subscribe to this channel and like this video. And thanks for watching. Bye.